So this is the part of the beer learning process that I like most. Ordering a beer. What should I order?
Well, really that's going to depend on your palate. It's going to depend on what you're looking for. Do you like hoppy beers? Do you like more subtle, simple, clean finish beers? You know, we can look at the Kolsch if you want something light and easy. It's going to be have a lot of the same aspects or similar aspects to a lager, in that not a whole lot of yeast characteristic goes into it. It's primarily Pilsner malt as well as a little bit of rye, because I love rye.
I do too.
So with that beer, you're really just going to get a clean, simple, easy to drink, light ale. If you're looking for more on the malty side, with more of the yeast giving off the esters and dominating, then I would say you'd want to look at something like the Albatross Landing, the Dunkelweizen. You're going to get kind of a similar notes to banana bread with that. So it'll have more of that clove on the nose with a little bit of that banana finish. That's all yeast derived with Munich malt and a couple other specialty malts, just to bring that kind of bready caramel notes to it. If you're looking for an IPA, I would suggest the Farmer's Bane. Again, this comes from my love of rye and how it's underutilized, in my opinion, in the brewing industry. It holds about a quarter of the grain bill is actually rye malt from here in Colorado. So it lays that foundation of just kind of that nice spicy undertone, a little bit of earthy undertone that complements the big citrus hops that go on top of it.
So do you think I could make it home in my car if I had all of them?
I would not suggest it. I would definitely suggest getting yourself some sort of either public transportation or calling one of the various car services that are in the area.
But not 911.
If you had all of them, I would have my concerns. I would definitely be feeding you a lot of water.
So in this process, could you kind of do an A to Z about standard beer making and what you do to make different kinds of beers?
Yeah, absolutely.
I want to know this just so that I can order one beer, because I'm a high maintenance beer orderer.
Absolutely. So the process all starts in the brew house, where we're taking various grains. So depending on what style we're trying to make, say it's a Kolsch or more of the German Bavarian style, even with the wheat ales, you're going to use a Pilsner malt. Pilsner malt is traditionally as your base malt. Now, traditionally, Pilsner malt is very light, maybe a little bit of cracker and a little bit of honey on the back end from it when it's just highlighting the Pilsner. Now, so what we'll do is we'll make our decision. Are we making a German style ale? Okay, then what Pilsner malt do we want to use? Do we want to use some of the Weyermann or Best malts, the actual German maltsters, to get that authentic flavor there? Or do we want to use a Colorado malt that's going to be very similar, but give it more of that in-state, down-home kind of supporting your local agriculture? So you have to make these choices because there's very, very slight differences between the malts. So that's kind of where you start to base it and say, all right, well, I want to make this style. What kind of flavors do I want to get from that? And from there, you can say, all right, do I want to use a pale ale malt? Do I want to use a Pilsner, a base malt, Vienna, Munich, any of these options? And each one of them is going to give you a different flavor profile in the finished beer.
Could you tell people what a malt is?
Malt is going to be, it's either mostly going to be either barley or wheat. You can get rye, you can use sorghum, they have a number of other variations that are available. Effectively what they're doing is they'll take it from the farm, they kiln it, either very light for your Pilsner or for your light base malts. Basically what they're doing is they're lightly baking it, if you will. And so from that, you're then taking it, and if you're getting into like crystal malts, what they'll do is they actually, you're soaking the malt so that the cheat actually starts to come out of the grain again. And at that point, then you're gonna effectively kiln it, so you lock in some of that moisture. It starts to bring out some of those sugars, and then depending on how long you roast it, gives you the various flavors in malt. But malt is really either just brewing barley, 6-row barley, wheat, or rye, traditionally. And so from those, the same deal. So for instance, barley is your most common grain that you're going to find. Depending on how long and at what temperature the grain is effectively roasted at, is kilned at, gives you different flavor profiles. And so a medium grain that has been just sprouted in a crystal grain, doesn't add sugars that the yeast can consume. They're long chain sugars, so that's going to add mouthfeel. It's going to add that caramel or crystal or toffee notes in that kind of range, generally between 20 and up to 150. And then once you get above that, the longer or the higher temperature that a grain is kilned at gives you your chocolate malts. So you can have black malt, you can have chocolate, various chocolate malts. Anything basically 160 and above starts to get into that, the specialty grain level. So where we extract the sugars is in the mash tun. And so we add hot water to it to basically either decide, do we want to mash in at anywhere from 148 to 158 degrees. Anything above 160 and you start to denature the grain, and then you're not able to extract any of the sugars. It basically, it shuts off the enzymatic activity. But in that range, if you go on the lower side, then you're going to get that predominance of short chain sugars. And so the yeast is able to consume those sugars in groups of 3s. Whereas if you get, and so from that 140, 147 to 151, 152 range, you're going to get a predominance of short chain sugars. Once you get above that, you start to extract more long chain sugars. And again, those yeasties are only eating it in groups of 3. And so if you have, say, 4 or 5 sugars in a row along that chain, it'll only eat 3, so it'll be a creamy mouthfeel because there's a higher proportion of long chain sugars that were in the mash. And so we can play around with, do we want to make a kolsch that's going to be relatively dry, a lot of short chain sugars, or do we want to do something along the lines of the Morning Dew, the English style stout, that you want that residual sweetness, you want that mouthfeel there on the back end, so you want longer chain sugars in there. And we can determine that all within A, our grain selection, and B, where we mash and what temperature we mash into the mash tun.
So our friends, where are they at? Out in
TV land.
In TV land. Can you tell them what long and short chain sugars are?
So basically, yeast consume in groups of 3 in the sugar. So once you get through that mash tun, we'll then transfer everything into the boil kettle, add our hops to offset the sweetness of that sugar, of that liquor, and flavoring, right? So hops act as a preservative as well as they add that bitterness that's needed to offset. Otherwise, it's going to be sickly sweet when you get done. As well as, depending on the beer style, you're adding hops in for flavor. Once you get done, that's when, with that, you transfer it into the fermenter, and that's when you pitch your yeast. You pitch your yeast in, you bring the hot liquor over, the now cold liquor over, and those yeast will start to propagate and they will start to multiply. And as they do that, you're feeding them that sugar water. Well, the long chains are, again, anything 4, 5, etc. out, versus that short chain sugar that the yeast preferred to consume.
That's great. Now, what's the next step in this process?
So that at that point, we allow the yeast to consume the sugars. And so we're actually at this point starting to make beer. Before, again, we just had basically sugar, water, or wort. Once the yeast start to consume, that will give you also some of your flavor profiles. So you can go with, say, a Kolsch yeast or a lager yeast that is fermented at a relatively low temperature. Those yeasts are going to then give you a very clean profile on the finished product. And the reason is, generally with temperature as well as pitch rates, and there's other variables that go into determining it, but the lower the temperature, the cleaner, easier finish it'll be. So on that end, you have a Kolsch yeast or a lager yeast at any brewery that's making a lager. On the opposite end is something along the lines of, I would say, I'm not going to get into sours, but you're getting into the lines of like the Belgian Saisons or the Golden Strongs, where they, or even, for instance, something that we have on the top on the board is the Hefeweizen. Well, you're generally fermenting on the higher end. Traditionally and generally, you're looking at a profile or a fermentation temperature of 65 to call it 71, 72. Now, Belgians are going to be on that higher end. They're going to be 72 and up. A Weihenstephan fermentation is anywhere from 65 to roughly 70, depending on the brewery and what they're trying to extract. So the warmer you get with the yeast, the warmer temperature, or even say an under pitching of the yeast, the more stress that you put onto it, you're going to create more esters. And so you're going to get more banana flavor, for instance, or vanilla with a Weihenstephan, or with a Belgian yeast, you're going to get more of that, the fruity flavors and the pepper that the yeast is known to produce. So you kind of have all these variations with which yeast strain you're selecting, what temperature you want to ferment at, your pitch rate, and you can determine, and all within, stylistically, you can determine which characteristics you want to bring out of that yeast and how it's going to play with the wort that you fed it.
Stay tuned to hear Nathan tell us about how beer making process impacts the beers you like to drink.